am here at Planet Comic-Con with the wonderful and gracious and lovely Melinda Snodgrass. Thanks very much for joining me. Melinda is a writer, an editor, a TV writer. You've kind of been there and done everything. And for folks that are not familiar with Melinda, she was a script editor for The Next Generation, Star Trek, for 2 seasons, 2 and 3, right?
Half of season 2 and all of season 3.
Cool. And then you did a whole lot of other TV work also. I was surprised to see your name on Sequest. I didn't know you worked on that.
I did one freelance episode. I did the Ghost Story.
Oh, really?
Sequest. It was kind of fun. But mostly I did Reasonable Doubts and Profiler because I'm known as a science fiction writer, but interestingly enough, most of my work has been in lawyer and cop things.
Yeah.
Even though, like I've done scripts for like Odyssey 5 and Sequest and, some other things that are science fiction, but because of Star Trek, I've ended up being viewed as this, I'm a science fiction person, which I am because I write novels that are science fiction novels too.
Yeah, you've always been involved pretty heavily in fandom, so you were a science fiction fan, obviously, before you were writing any of that stuff.
Well, actually, I didn't know about fandom. I read my first science fiction book when I was 7. I found A Princess of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs.
Yeah.
And I was lost. And our local library had this little tiny narrow shelf of science fiction, and I just started at A, and I just read all the way to the bottom. And then I was probably in my late 20s. I had a friend while I was in law school, my friend Victor Milan, and I were hanging out, and I was getting to know the writing community, and he said, well, we have this local convention, Bubonicon, and you'd probably enjoy it. So I went off to the con.
And you didn't even know such a thing existed?
I didn't even know fandom existed. And it was like, oh my God, my family. I found my family. I didn't know I had been missing them for all these years. And since then, I've been doing it ever since.
So many people start being fans of things in isolation.
Yeah, we don't know there's a community of people who share our weird fascination with all things Marvel or spaceships or whatever it is.
Yeah. What kinds of things would you say you were the biggest fan of? And has that changed much over the years? Like, are you still really into the same things you were into when you were a lot younger, or have your taste kind of evolved, would you say?
I don't think have I evolved? That's a philosophical question. I think I still prefer science fiction over fantasy, so that hasn't changed.
You're in good company.
Because I always wanted the stars. I wanted to go and visit distant planets and meet alien races, and so I tend to prefer that. Although, what's happened is I've discovered all these new things, like gaming. I didn't know video. Well, I was in a role-playing group with George and Walter John Williams.
We'll get there and talk about that. Wildcards,
that was a whole thing. But I have discovered video games because I was hired by EA to write a game because they read one of my scripts and they picked me.
What was it?
It was going to be a Lord of the Rings game.
It never happened.
I worked for 2 days at the campus up near San Jose. And then the big bosses decided to cancel the game. So but I became fascinated watching these, brilliant young people creating art before my eyes. Although, pardon me, they were really cute because they said, after I'd helped them going through on the whiteboard about the story, and they were like, oh, now I know why we need writers.
Yeah.
This was really nice. So, but I came back home and I was like, this is so cool, and I bought an Xbox. And I started playing. So now my
wow,
taste,
that's really cool.
Yeah, so I love video games.
That's awesome.
But I'm a BioWare girl. I want companions. I want to be able to craft my own character.
Okay.
Although I am about to start Witcher 3 when I go home. So, and it's a completely new form of entertainment.
Yeah, of course.
So I think that has certainly been a change for me. I still love to read. And I get to watch a lot of television because it's homebrew.
Yeah, sure.
Is nice. So, but in terms of my reading taste, I read a broad palette of different kinds of things: mystery, science fiction, some fantasy.
Well, that's really important as a writer, right?
Yeah.
You're not just reading one kind of thing all the time.
And of course there's always research. It's like, what I need to know about this thing. In fact, I mentioned on a panel this morning that they have a special list at the NSA about, those people are writers, so if they're looking into anthrax or bomb making, don't panic, because it's a bunch of crazy writers. So that really helps.
So one of the reasons I'm really excited to talk to you, beyond just, of course, you helped craft a lot of my chapter. A lot of the things that I really care about come from my love of Star Trek and of science fiction in general. But with you, I get to talk about my two favorite loves, which is both superheroes and Star Trek, and that's going to be really fun. So I want to talk about Star Trek. I want to talk about Wild Cards. But before we get to that stuff, I'm curious as to how you initially become involved with Star Trek, because the timeline with Wild Cards to Star Trek is really interesting. Because that first book, Wild Cards 1 and Star Trek The Next Generation happened the same year.
1987.
Yeah. So how do you wind up doing both of those things simultaneously? Or I guess one of them is happening as you were publishing a thing that you would have been working on before that.
Right. It's all George Martin's fault. Okay, everything is George Martin's fault. So,
we're at a convention.
Yeah, so it's loud and they're having fun. So George and I were in a role-playing group, and this is wild card lore. I'll tell you that lore in a minute.
Right.
But meanwhile, we've become very, very close friends. George gets lured out to Hollywood, and in fact, he called me when he was offered this job on the new Twilight Zone. He said, "Should I do this?" And I was like, "Of course you should do this. My God, oh, what a fabulous experience and chance." He goes off to Hollywood, does New Twilight Zone, gets on Beauty and the Beast. And my phone rings one day, and it's George. And he goes, "Hey, Snod." Yes, he calls me Snod. And he said, "I think you'd be really good at the screenwriting thing, because you write very strong dialogue. You're a real architect in terms of your plotting, which is important. I've discovered it's really important out here in Hollywood. And you have very powerful characters. And if you write a script, I'll show it to my agent." So I went, "Okay, I'll write a spec script." And I didn't want to do Beauty and the Beast because I didn't want to put my friend on the spot. You know, I didn't want him to go, "Oh my God, this is terrible. How do I tell her?" Or worse, show it to his bosses and have them go, "What are you doing?"
I thought you were going to say it just wasn't the kind of material you wanted to write.
No, I mean, you know, Beauty and the Beast was fun, although I teased George mercilessly about it. It's like, why are you washing clothes? All the women are down there beating things on a rock, you know, and meanwhile, Father and Vincent are in there talking about Shakespeare. It was like not fair. But I didn't want to do it because I thought it put him in a bad place.
Sure.
And I was trained as an attorney. I had graduated and done the bar and the whole thing, and I didn't want to do LA law because it looked really like it was carefully plotted. So I ultimately thought...
You mean like kind of formulaic?
Yeah, well, not it was like clearly they had a plan, and it was very hard to slide a script in when clearly the script
so you
was
have to work
building
within the parameters of
what they were working toward, and I didn't know what they were working toward, so I thought that would be awkward. And I grew up on Trek when I was a little kid. I loved original Trek. I mean, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy were just my heroes.
With your love of space travel and optimism for the future, I assume you must have grown up on Star Trek.
I grew up on Star Trek, and so it was a no-brainer. I thought, I'll write a Trek script. So I started watching the show, and ironically, the robot was the most interesting character in the show, which is kind of a sad statement. And so I sat down to...
They got more interesting.
I gather so. But at any rate, I decided to write a script about Data, and I got this idea of using my legal education, using the Dred Scott decision, which was this infamous Supreme Court decision that ruled that a runaway slave was property and not a person, and he could be returned to his master. And I thought, you know, this works perfectly for Data and Starfleet. But meanwhile, George had given me this huge lecture about how you never sell your spec script. Ever, ever, ever. Your spec script is just a calling card, and it just gets you in the door, and then you need to have pitches of other episodes prepared if you get asked to come in and pitch. So I'm sitting there, and I came up with this idea, and I thought, this is a really good idea. So I called George when he was out in LA. I called him up, and I said, "Look, I've got this idea. I hate to waste it on a spec if it's never going to sell. So maybe I should write something else and save it." And George gave me the single best piece of advice I've ever gotten. He said to me, "Never hoard your silver bullet," meaning lead with the very best thing you have. Never do the second best thing. So,
which ends up going counter to the "don't sell the spec script" thing. It's almost like a three laws of robotics issue.
Yeah, it was
right?
like
one trumps the other.
You just don't hoard your silver bullet. So I wrote The Measure of a Man.
Yeah.
And sent it off to George. He gave it to his agent, and then the writer's strike hit for 6 months. So I forgot about it. Went back to writing my books, riding my horses, doing my thing. 6 months later, I get this phone call from George's agent who says they want to meet with you on Star Trek. So I fly out to LA and I went into the meeting, and I had my little 3x5 cards with like 3 more story ideas and my sweaty little hands. And I meet Morris Hurley, who was running the writer's room at that point.
Yeah.
And I said, and he was like, well, tell me about yourself. So I did. And then I said, and Mr. Hurley, I have these 3 ideas if you'd like to hear my pitch. And he went, shh. And he pointed to the whiteboard behind his desk and over his head, and it had a list of the upcoming shows to be shot and when the shooting was
already on the
and
list.
It was already on the list.
Wow.
Of Man.
That's amazing.
And I was just like, so I sort of floated out, and George's offices on Beauty and the Beast were literally just down the road from Paramount Studios. So I went right down to George's office, and he said, she just floated in, her feet never even touched the ground.
That's amazing.
So I sold my script. And then there was this peculiar hiccup in that Gene Roddenberry called me to tell me he liked the script, but then proceeded to tell me that there were no lawyers in the 24th century, and that Data would be delighted to be disassembled as the research. And
That's a big popular quote from Roddenberry, and we abolished all the lawyers.
Yeah, and I was sort of going, I'm having a heart attack, and I was like, Mr. Roddenberry, that's not possible, because you have to have contracts, and people get divorces, and there have to be lawyers.
How does due process even work if you don't have litigation?
The Federation implies it. Anyway, so
and we know they had lawyers in the 23rd century.
Yeah, it's like what they just.
How did we evolve past that in 80 years?
Yeah, it was.
Because you were a court martial.
Yeah, and it was a little alarming. So I got a phone with, and I'm on the phone with Gene Roddenberry, and I'm like, oh my God, he's blown up my script. So I call Maury, and he tell him what's happened, and after he finished cussing for about 5 minutes and never repeated himself, he was a good Irishman. He said, "How soon can you get out here?" So I flew back to LA. I said, "Well, let me get a ticket, a day or two." So I fly back to LA, and I sat in a room with a notes meeting with him and Rick Berman, and they gave me notes on the script. And that's when I had to cook up the poker game.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, and at the end of the 3 hours, Rick left, and Maury looked at me, and he said, "I'm hiring you, and you start on Monday." And this was Thursday. So I flew back to New Mexico, found a house sitter, packed up my car, and drove to LA and went to work on Star Trek. And then meanwhile, George and I are still trying to do wild cards in the cracks between his work and my work and all the other stuff that was going on.
Yeah, I think it's astounding that so much of what you put in A Measure of a Man ends up sticking, and it really helps to shape and develop that show. And when you wrote it, you didn't have any sense that it would even get used.
No, I thought it was just going to be my spec script, and it would never see the light of day. But I mean, the reason I had to come up with the poker game, my initial teaser was Data learning to swim.
Oh, interesting.
Because I wanted something where
that probably wouldn't have stuck. That probably wouldn't have been staple where every other episode the bridge crew is in a swimming pool. That probably wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, they couldn't. We were terrible at going on location. We sucked at going on location first.
Interesting.
Secondly, his makeup would come off.
Yeah.
And that was literally what Maury said to me. So we can't go on location. His makeup will smear. And, because I was thinking, well, he weighs like 400 pounds. That had been established. And he's read all the theory. He gets in the pool and sinks like a stone. That was sort of and he said, we got to have something else where the theoretical doesn't match the actual experience. And it was like, what about poker?
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, because bluffing. Data would never understand bluffing.
Yeah.
And that was how that came up. And it was absolutely, and then the other desperate thing is, halfway through, just before we were supposed to start shooting, they looked at the schedule and they saw that Whoopi Goldberg had been contracted for X many of the 22 episodes, and they said, you have to put Guinan in the script.
I was going to ask you about that. I wondered if when you first wrote that you would have even thought to put Guinan in it.
She wasn't in the script, and they said, well, we need to, Whoopi needs another episode, you have to put her in the script.
Because that scene seems like really paramount to that episode.
It became, like the critical scene. That and I had a friend who was a Navy officer, a Navy pilot, who gave me the thing that made Measure work. He said, when you are at sea and you don't have JAG officers available, your captain always defends and the XO always prosecutes.
And there's just immediate, obvious drama there.
There was such tension and drama, and
which was hard to get in that show.
Yeah, so hard to get in that show. And Jonathan is a very good actor.
Yeah.
And he never got enough to do. And I love the fact that in Measure, he actually got to be competitive with Picard, but also suffering because he didn't want to hurt his friend. So that was really exciting for me. But you know, the Guinan scene, I mean, I was like, again, hyperventilating. I'm walking. I was up on the 3rd floor, and so I was starting walking up and down the stairs, and then I would walk around my office and trying to come up with, you know, what is that scene, and then I went, oh, okay, this is what I can do with it. This Guinan can lead him.
Yeah, I mean, it's the thematic crux. The whole, I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, that was the point of the episode, but suddenly it could just be, you know, stated in a really interesting way. So
yeah.
that was how that.
Was there did you intend to try to make Picard more interesting and more likable?
Yes.
Than he had been before?
Yes.
Because I feel like that's one of the first real flashes of personality we get for Picard. And Picard is maybe my favorite fictional character of all time. I love Jean-Luc Picard.
Yeah.
And this is well before Samaritan's here. This is like 10 episodes before we started getting his background and the thing with his artificial heart and all of that. So do you sit down and you go, I've got to make Picard not a stick in the mud anymore?
Well, I mean, you know, the truth was, especially after I'd been on the show for a while, I mean, you truly did begin to feel like, can I be a little bit lewd on your podcast?
You know, like the 7 words you can't say on television, but beyond that, sure.
It felt like everybody had a broomstick up their behinds,
yeah,
okay?
Sure.
And it became, and many of us on the show were we loved the original series, and I wanted the passion that you saw between Kirk and Spock and McCoy.
Yeah.
And we were never really, in some ways, able to, at least not while I was there, to give that. And
right.
And I wanted more a sense of these people. I didn't want Data to be the only interesting character, you know. So yeah, and I took each of the actors out to lunch and I asked them what they did in their lives that beyond just what they were doing. And you know, I found out that that Patrick was not only a very fine fencer, stage fencer, he could also ride. So that I put the horse into pen pals. You know, I mean, just trying to.
And both of those are huge things in his character.
Yeah.
Down the road. Yeah.
Try to give a little sense of the personality, because I felt like that was the thing that was missing from Next Gen that the original show did so well.
Before you, no one would have ever thought to bring in an old flame for Picard who called him a damn sexy man. It just wouldn't have happened.
Well, and the fun thing, I mean, the one thing I have learned, whether it's from writing novels and certainly writing television, you never play the backstory, but you can hint at the backstory.
Yeah.
So I never explained what happened, you know, what went on. It was sort of just there, you know.
Yeah, you give us enough. I mean, we know that she was responsible for
she prosecuting
him for the Stargazer incident.
Yeah.
Which I had forgotten about until I went back and rewatched it. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of like finally blending in a lot of continuity and creating a living and breathing world in that.
I mean,
episode.
the other thing that happened too is they had never shot anything quite like this, and the show shot 13 minutes too long.
I was going to ask you how that even happened.
Because they didn't, and the director, whose name I blanked on, he was determined he was going to shoot all of the scenes. And he actually had his director's cut had all of them in there, but it was 13 minutes too long.
Because that's really unusual, right?
Very unusual, yeah.
Because you know how much time you have.
Yeah, but they had never done anything that was quite that dialogue heavy and that emotionally fraught, I guess. And there had to be sort of, you know, it couldn't be an Aaron Sorkin walk and talk West Wing kind of that. There had to be moments of reflection, especially like in that Guinan scene. And so, I mean, I can say all this now, having done this for a lot of years, and at the time I was just I had no idea what I was doing. It was the first time I'd ever done it. But mercifully, he did put everything in, and they slipped me a copy, an old tape.
I was going to ask you to tell that story. Yeah.
They sent me Mike Okuda and Sternbach, who would have gotten in terrible trouble, and then it turned out to be a good thing. Sent me a VHS tape. And of the entire director's cut, and I had it. So when they did the remastering,
the only living copy.
Well, and what happened is once the gentleman at CBS took a look at it in this terribly beat up tape, he was like, go find the film. He said, we're going to do this, and we're going to remaster it. We're going to put everything back in. Now, there are things that I look at it now and go, never bring people into a room, start in the middle of the scene. I mean, there are a lot of, and there's some repetitive things that now that I'm much more experienced, I wouldn't do. But there were also some scenes that I'm really glad got put back in.
Yeah.
So, that's how it happened.
I got to see the theatrical Fandom event for
Yeah,
that, and that was wonderful. And it's really cool that they put in the special feature that's on that I'm sure I don't have it, but I'm sure they put
it's on the Blu-ray.
The Blu-ray for the remasters.
They have the
they showed that in the theater, and so you know in the theater about the VHS tape. And I had never heard that story.
Yeah,
that was amazing.
Yeah, no, I actually friends of mine said you got to come back to LA and you got to go to the movie theater. And,
did you do that?
Yeah, I did.
That's great.
Yeah, there were a whole group of us there, and it was an incredible experience. So no, I mean, Star Trek launched my Hollywood career, and I got to write Measure and got nominated for a Writers Guild Award for outstanding writing in a drama for that script.
It's a lot of people's favorite episode. It winds up being the top 5, top 10 lists. It's almost always there. It's a wonderful episode.
I had a wonderful director.
The show could not have been what it is without that episode.
Like I said, I had a wonderful director. I had a wonderful cast. I mean, they delivered those lines just impeccably.
Is there some sort of like personal reverence for you for the name Philippa?
Yes.
Because that is both your pen name when you write urban fantasy and the name of the captain in that episode.
Right. Philippa means lover of horses. And
you're an equestrian.
I'm an equestrian. And I'm just very fond of it. So that's why.
I didn't think that was probably a coincidence.
No, it was not a coincidence.
Give me one second. So Yesterday's Enterprise. You worked on that episode.
Did I?
Did you not? I saw your name attached, and I wasn't sure how far because that's another major groundbreaking episode.
Yeah, I mean, if it was during half of the second or all of the third season, then yes, my name would have been there, but I did not actually work on it.
Okay.
It's just that I was on the show, and so they list us. And I have a horrible confession to make. Trek was a really difficult show.
Yeah, sure.
Very difficult show, and they went through 80 gazillion writers over the 7 years. And I at the end of the third season, I just said, I'm done. I'm going to go back to New Mexico and write books now. Thank you, because I was burnt out, and so I have never ever seen another episode of any Trek show.
I was starting to get that sense earlier when I mentioned that the TNG, those characters get really interesting.
Yeah,
I got the sense that you were familiar with
I love Ira Bear. Ira was a mentor to me. He's a fantastic writer. I understand he did wonderful things on Deep Space Nine.
Yeah.
I can't go there. I mean, it was.
I understand.
It was literally that hard on me, and so not until J.J. Abrams rebooted, and then sometimes I'm sorry, like, oh my God, the second Trek. Oh. Anyway, I have not seen anything. I've never watched another episode of Star Trek. They kept wanting me to do like retrospective to talk about all the series, and I'm like, not your girl. I can talk about original. I can talk about that time when I was on Next Gen. I can't talk about anything else. So.
Obviously, I would never try to get you to do that. I mean, I wouldn't try to pressure or anything, but I do think that there are some episodes there that if you were able to get past that,
and I have friends who can say, Inner Light, and they mention on
you know about some of that
I
stuff.
know,
sure.
I hear about it from people who love it, and I go.
Well, you probably know the last episode ends with a poker game.
With a poker game.
Yeah, and they just keep bringing that back.
It became this trope. George and I had a different way to end it. Actually.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
We wanted to, which was our comedic ending. Do you want to hear about it?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, George and I were sitting and hanging out at his office, and when he had his overall deal with Columbia, we were talking about how to end it, and we came up with, we're on the bridge, Picard. Fires everywhere, half the bridge crew is dead, he's tattered and torn, he's fighting, and it looks hopeless, and then there's, woo, the little signal, and it goes, Ensign Picard, report to the bridge. And then he touches thing, and the holodeck goes away, and he walks out.
Hilarious.
Just as Captain Kirk is walking past and goes, "You spend a lot of time in there, Ensign."
That's
that was how we wanted to end it, but that was everybody who loved Picard would be like,
oh yeah, no, that would have hurt my feelings, but
yeah. No, we were joking, and if you want to cut that,
no, not at all. That's hysterical. Well, but I mean, I can put myself in your shoes.
maybe he was going to be a lieutenant, actually, Lieutenant Picard.
Well, and there's an episode with Q that obviously you've not seen where we take him back in time, and he has never had the fight with the Nausicaans and has his heart messed up, and he ends up just being a lowly lieutenant on the ship. And so if you ended it that way, everyone would have been like, "Oh, it's just Picard from Tapestry, the whole show. It's just Tapestry with Picard the whole time." Before you left, was there any talk about you were working on DS9? Because that would have been real close to when that must have started being in development.
I think it started in development in season 4, and I was working on Reasonable Doubts.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, no,
I didn't know if there was any talk or any rumblings by the end of 3, but I guess it doesn't. Yeah, I guess there wouldn't have been the more I'm thinking about it.
No, because it was 7. They knew they were going to run the 7 years.
Sure,
because
yeah.
it was going to give this great franchise that they could make money. Paramount could run forever. And by then
Well, ratings weren't great at the end of 3. I mean, that really starts to pick up in
it
4
started
after Best of Both Worlds.
Yeah, and I would say it was probably not till 4 or 5 that they really, because you can figure out a TV show within a year, and although now it seems to be glacial, but back in the day certainly, and they knew they had just this thing that was just going to mint money for Paramount. So, but no, I've gone on to work on Reasonable Doubts, which was a terrific show with Mark Harmon and Marty Maitland. So,
a lot about making television has obviously changed, inordinately. What would you say from the 30 some odd years you've been working in television? What would you say has stayed the same? What hasn't changed?
what hasn't changed? I mean, actually, in many ways, so much has changed because we're picking up the British model instead of putting shows on the air and doing 22, which just is a crushing schedule for everyone, actors, writers, producers, everybody. We're now doing these sort of 10 and 12 episode arcs, which I think is one of the reasons television is so brilliant right now, is because there's time for the staff to sit down and craft a coherent story and tell it, instead of this, oh my God, what are we going to do on episode 14? Oh, why don't we do It's a Wonderful Life again, or Rashomon, or maybe we'll do a clip show. Because
you just roll a D20 and whatever comes up.
Whatever comes up. And so I think that has been a profound change. What hasn't changed, I think, is although it's getting much better with the multiple outlets, is the fear. Everybody in Hollywood wants to be the first to be second. They don't want to be the person to try the first new thing. They want somebody else to do that first new thing, and then they'll imitate.
To know that it's going to work out.
Yeah, and so I think getting people to agree to do something really edgy and new and different, that hasn't changed. I think that's much harder to be the first person to do that new take, that new twist.
Do you think studio and network oversight has overall gotten better, or does it just depend on who you're talking
It
with?
depends on where you're working. I mean, if you're on, if you're on cable, there's very little interference. I mean, if you're on the big 4, then there's all of these layers of people that are breathing down your neck, and it's a great deal freer. And especially when you go to the Netflix, Amazon.
When you say cable, you have to kind of lump in the streaming services.
Yeah, the streaming services those are just fantastic.
And most of those, they don't have to worry about getting canceled this season.
Yeah,
they can write a whole arc.
They just say we're going to do this, and they usually look at everything before they greenlight it. And then you're just left alone. I mean, it's magnificent. If you're on a CBS show or an NBC show, you're going to have to get through, the studio execs who are overseeing it, and then you have to get through the network execs, and then you have to get through. Hello.
Wow, that's interesting. I wonder how we get that back.
Just wave. And you just don't have that if you're.
This has been Alone in the Dark with Melinda Snodgrass.
With Amazon and Hulu and those kind of things, there's so much more creativity is allowed to the creator at that point, because you don't have this layers of bureaucracy that are keeping an eye on things. So that's been the new wonderful paradigm that we have now. So come on in.
So I have finally started sampling web cards.
Okay.
Which I had heard about from Ken Keller for years.
Oh, right.
I'm sure you know Ken.
Yes, I know Ken.
Ken's a friend of mine, and he when I met him 5 or 6 years ago, he was trying to get me really hard to write wildcards. Never got around to it. And then I found out that you were going to be on. I finally said, okay, I have to finally sit down and at least read some wildcards.
Right.
So so I read the first book, and I started in on the new one just to get a sense of the flavor of what it's like now.
Right.
But there's like 17 books in between, or however many it is.
Did you start with Inside Straight for the new ones, I hope?
No, I didn't. I just started sampling. I found the most recent one at a bookstore and bought it. She just sense the flavor of it, but of course I'm completely lost and have no idea what I'm looking at. So obviously I'm gonna have to go back and I'll do that. But I just wanted to get a sense of it. But anyway, so when I finished that first book, something hit me from Measure of a Man. I think I can sum up what I understood about like what Wildcards is with the line you gave Data in that episode. Life is rarely fair. That's what Wildcards is.
Yes.
For a lot of my audience is not going to be familiar with that series. Can you give us just a little bit of like a pitch, a log line? What is Wildcards?
Wildcards is superheroes for grown-ups, and it's about making life choices that are real. Because most people, if they got superpowers, would not put on long johns and fight crime. They would continue to be an accountant, or a lawyer, or a housewife, and yet that would affect their lives in ways both good and bad. And we wanted to explore what that does to the human heart.
Yeah.
Rather than what it does to, I love the Marvel movies, but I'm getting very tired of the escalation of scale. It's not enough to threaten New York, then you have to threaten the planet, then you have to threaten the galaxy. Then in Thor: The Dark World, it was like the whole universe was going to end. And in Wildcards, we're much more interested in what this does to your marriage.
Yeah.
Or to your choice about whether you can have a child or not. Because those are the things that ultimately define who we are as people. And we were interested in viewing these people through the lens of being human beings first and superheroes second.
Which is why it's so focused on a lot of different protagonists from a lot of different stories, as opposed to just you're following like a standard ensemble cast.
Yeah, well, and also it's a shared world anthology. So
Yeah.
George and I created the sandbox, and then we invited friends to come play with us in the
Yeah,
sandbox.
which is really interesting. The format is fascinating, and obviously he's evolved over the years. It's kind of different now.
Well, George and I are much
Beginning.
better at it now because we've both been on TV shows, and we actually run it a lot like.
I was going to ask you how much it was like a TV show.
Now it is. Now very much it is. And if anybody's interested in getting into Wildcards, there's book one, which is called Wildcards, which sort of starts in 1946 and then goes up to the 80s when the book was published, and gives you the background and a lot of the iconic older characters. But then we restarted the series with Inside Straight. We brought in a bunch of new writers with new attitudes, and it was great. And we have some wonderful, Paul Cornell, who wrote for Doctor Who, is one of our writers.
Yeah.
Daniel Abraham, who's part of James S.A. Corey in The Expanse, he's one of our writers. Carrie Bodden, we have this tremendous lineup of writers. And so I would say Wildcards, Inside Straight, those are your two entry points, and it's also going to be a TV show.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about that later. What can you tell us about that? So it's in development for
Universal.
which network?
I can't tell you.
Okay, sure.
There will be a press release. Watch my blog, watch Facebook. There will be a press release.
But things are moving on.
Things are absolutely moving on.
So can we say it will definitely happen, or it's looking like it's very, very likely?
It is, I would say, 97% going to happen.
That's really cool. Yeah. So is it going to be, again? You may not be able to answer these questions. Is it likely to be vignette like the original book is, or is it?
It won't be an anthology show.
Okay, sure.
It won't be an anthology show. I can say that much with absolute certainty.
I was really fascinated by that format, but at the same time, it's easy for stories to start to kind of blend together after a while when you have a thing like that.
We do sometimes, we call them the Just Stories book.
Yeah, okay.
George and I were just doing Just Stories in this one, and book one was that. But then we go to the other extreme, which is usually we plot these things in threes, we call them triads, and George and I come up with the overarching plot, and we ask people to, here's the plot, you guys pitch stories to kind of fill this in.
So there's sort of a writer's room.
There is, in a sense, a writer's room. I'm about to start in on our next wildcard book called Three Kings, And because of George's schedule and what George is going to be doing, which is finishing his series, I'm going to be doing this, and I've got a writer in Ireland, a writer in England, a writer in Chicago, and a writer in Austin, Texas. And I'm getting ready to try to put together a Skype writer's room sometime next week, so we can start talking about this. And it's going to be a mosaic novel, which is a form George and I sort of created, which is, we don't have individual stories. Each writer is following their character, but then the editor, we braid it together so it reads like it's a novel, but it's
You can't tell where one writer begins and one ends.
Yeah. And it's like a relay race where we're handing off the baton to the next writer to carry on the story and carry on. It's really complicated. And some of our books end up sort of semi-mosaic novels, and we always have an interstitial writer who's kind of the mortar between the bricks. They're sort of the storyline that ties all the stories together, and that's always a challenging task too. So I've done that a few times.
It's really interesting that in the mid to late 80s there was something in the water, something in the air about like
gritty
adults
superheroes.
wanting gritty superheroes, more realistic, and the like historical like superhero world where it's an alternate history.
Right.
Wild Cards and Watchmen happen almost simultaneously.
We did happen simultaneously. We had no idea. It literally was in the ether.
Isn't that fascinating?
It really was.
And I think those are such interesting things to compare because this is just me talking, I'm not going to say one is better than the other. I really appreciate both of them.
Yeah,
and I think they're doing very different things.
They are doing very different things. I mean, Watchmen is I wasn't permitted to read comics as a kid, so when I got to start reading them, Watchmen was amazing, but it is an extremely bleak view.
Yeah.
And while we have darkness in Wild Cards, I think ultimately we want to be.
I think every perspective is
more
there.
hopeful. Yeah, we want to try to have that.
You have those stories that feel like at the end of the day, at least for that person, like there is kind of no hope. But you never have the sense that for the
world,
future,
the future is hopeless.
Watchmen would not have had that point where we stopped outlawing superheroes.
Yeah.
I mean, you're right. Like, and Wild Cards has that. Spoiler alert. Where we have that period, and then we lighten up on it, and people start to embrace the aces again.
Right, and so we try to have a difference. But we were actually both up for the Hugo the same year. Both Watchmen.
That's
versus,
amazing.
Yeah, and it really we had no idea that Alan Moore was doing that while over in Britain while we were doing this. I mean, it was just. And it does happen. You see it in Hollywood all the time. It'll be in the ether. Big asteroid hits the Earth, and then we get a good version of it, and then we get a crappy version of it.
Because people not in the know who don't have that historical perspective, it would be really easy to look at one or the other and say this ripped the other one off, but they happen at the same time.
They
I think that's so
literally
interesting.
happen at the same time.
And the ways in which they're opposites is really interesting. Like Watchmen is one self-contained story that there was no reason to ever do anything else with. And Wild Cards goes on forever.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Well, and it was so much fun to pick up with the new generation of aces because, if we look at it, 1946, I mean, we're looking at 70 years, of this. And so when Daniel Abraham wrote the opening line of Inside Straight, which is the new, and it literally starts with, our iconic hero that is this guy named Jet Boy who didn't have superpowers. And Daniel opened his with the very first line is, so who the effing was Jet Boy?
Yeah.
Because he's 18 years old and he's a blogger. And this has no meaning.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and so it's because these kids don't. That's ancient. Some guy in 1946 wasn't he with Napoleon or something?
And he's around the age Jet Boy was, and Jet Boy feels like he's lived his whole life because he was flying at like 13, and he doesn't know where to go. And he feels like an old man.
Yeah, and this
when
kid
that
is
happens.
like, my ambition is to be a famous blogger, and get girls, And so the juxtaposition of
That's great.
was really nice. So
how hard is it to keep the continuity straight?
Very.
It's got to be.
I'm really, really hoping once we the announcement gets made and things are good. I'm really hoping that somebody will come. There have been wikis for Wild Cards, and we do have an assistant who's trying to put together everything. The game books help us enormously.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
But we do. I'm really, really hoping that somebody will do what they did for George with Ice and Fire, and it'll be a nice compendium that all of us can refer to. I have literally 2 notebooks filled with pages of people's characters creation, the authors as they send in their characters and we accept them, and they're all there, and even some of them are in dot matrix paper and the faded ink, but I have them all, so, you know.
Wild Cards is kind of notorious for how disturbing you guys allow some of those stories to go. Does it ever get more terrifying than that first Fortunato story?
Yes, and
Cool.
and I think
Interesting.
I do believe that was actually a mistake that George and I made. I think the books got too dark.
Too dark.
And that was one of the reasons we wanted to.
And when I say great, I don't mean oh yay carnage or oh yay. Like,
no, I mean I felt like it was better that we brought back in a new generation and kind of with and we are making a real effort. I mean the latest from High Stakes.
You don't want to
the
feel
latest one is
gratuitous.
Mississippi. Yeah, Mississippi Roll is our latest, but High Stakes is our Cthulhu horror novel, and that's pretty disturbing. I mean I won't let.
I think that was the most recent. That's the one I
No,
started
the
reading.
newest one is called Mississippi Roll. It's our American triad, Mississippi Roll, Low Chicago, and Texas Hold'em. And I think Chicago comes out in the summer, and Texas Hold'em comes out in September. And then we have Knaves over Queens, which is our British wild card book that shows what happens in
What?
46 in Great Britain.
That's awesome.
That's why I have two writers, and then we're
That's
doing,
so cool.
yeah, and then we're doing Three Kings, which is the one I'm in charge of. That I have to have the Skype conversation with everybody next week.
So my co-host Eric is a big Wild Cards fan, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask you this because I know he would. Are you concerned about ever running out of card metaphors for titles?
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes we have to. I mean, Fort Freak, our police procedural, our cop book,
Yeah.
our Wet Streets cop book
Yeah,
is
that
called
one is-
Fort Freak.
is not a
yeah,
card
it doesn't have a
metaphor,
card. Yeah, I mean, in fact, I mean, we made it a joke when we did Inside Straight, which features the show called American Hero, and the teams are aces and hearts and queens, and you know, and it became like a running joke about, oh my God, how cliched can this be from all the kids? Again, the new kids, the new writers, the new generation, and it was really nice. So.
Real quick before we wrap up, I want to ask you a couple of just general writing questions. I always find this an interesting thing to do with writers. Do you, when you're writing prose, prefer the first or the third person?
It turns out I'm very good at writing first person.
Did you have that period where you really strayed away from it?
Yeah, because it can be done badly so easily, and it's a mistake many beginning writers make,
Yeah,
which is just
because they think
starting.
it's easier.
And it's not. It's the master of it was Roger Zelazny, and he's my god if I can ever approach. But it turns out I'm actually very good at it. But I didn't tackle it until I had written a lot. You know, it depends on what the story needs.
Yeah.
I began a wild card story for Joker Moon. I started it in third person. I wrote about 15 pages, and I went, no, we need to hear Dr. Finn's voice. I went back and rewrote it in first because it needed to be in first. Other things need to be in third. But I can judge that now because I've been doing this a long time.
That's another Wild Cards question I meant to ask you. Who is your favorite character to write in that series?
Oh, right now it's Noel Matthews, our
Yeah.
version of James Bond. He's such a bad man, so cynical.
Who was it in the old days?
Tachyon.
Your first story is Tachyon.
I
thought you might
love,
say
yeah,
that.
I love Tachyon. Although I enjoy Dr. Finn, my Joker character. So yeah, I mean, that's.
Last question. What do you say to a person who wants to write, likes to write, is terrified of the blank page?
You can listen. I'm terrified to start something new. I circle the desk chair like a dog trying to find a right place to lay down. Like, oh my god, because I'm always convinced this is one that will prove I have no talent and I cannot write. Unfortunately, I usually have a contract that makes me. I give myself permission to write badly because you can always fix it in post. You can always rewrite it. It can always get better. And so if you just give yourself permission, it doesn't have to be the best that Faulkner ever wrote the first time you sit down. Just write it and enjoy it and have fun.
Melinda, thank you so much for sitting down with me.
Thank you
This
for having
was
me.
an absolute delight. I really appreciate it. And folks, thanks a lot for watching. We sure appreciate it. See you again soon.
Thank you.